Hello and welcome to episode 8 of the Motivational Millennial podcast.
Yay!
So today we're talking with Sojourner Nir, a New York Times reporter and Pulitzer finalist who tells incredible stories about everyday people, their struggles, their challenges, and their triumphs. Stick around after the interview where Ivy and I will discuss some of our biggest takeaways during the after show.
Onward!
Hello, welcome to the Motivational Millennial podcast, where we talk with inspiring members of the millennial generation who are living life with a sense of purpose and achieving their dreams. I'm Blake Brandis.
And I'm Ivy LeClaire.
Our motivational millennial guest today is Sarah Maslin Nir. Sarah is a staff reporter for the New York Times covering Brooklyn. She is the author of Unvarnished, a 13-month investigation into the working conditions of manicurists in New York City. Her report prompted swift response from New York Governor Andrew Cuomo and a new law aimed at making workplaces equitable and safer for manicurists. Sarah was a finalist for the 2016 Pulitzer Prize in recognition of her investigative journalism. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely. So we'd love to hear more about what you're up to and why you're so passionate about it.
Yeah, I cover Brooklyn now, but really Brooklyn is the universe. And I think any beat that you have as a reporter can be universalized. And that's what really inspires me. That I might be telling the story about a mom and pop shop that's closing, but doing it in such a way which you see your own mom and pop. Maybe you see yourself. And that's the really interesting part about being a journalist, whether it's an investigative journalist or just run-of-the-mill beat reporter, which I've returned to. It's really fabulous. You get to live a lot of different lives and see through a lot of different eyes.
I love that. And how did you decide that journalism was going to be the medium for you to explore those stories?
Well, I didn't. So I thought I wanted to be a veterinarian growing up. And then I realized I just really wanted to fix things. So I thought maybe I'll go into politics. You know, everyone's talking about the system being broken and people trying to fix it through politics. I thought that's the way. I actually worked in politics for a little while. And the candidate I was working for, a presidential candidate, didn't succeed. And I thought, why didn't he succeed? If this guy had the answers, why didn't it get across? And I realized that the real way to fix things was to keep people informed so that they knew their best interests and so that they could really make good decisions for themselves. And it's all well and good for people to say you're empowered, but real power is knowledge. However, while that put me on the journalism track, I got a little distracted because I started covering the nexus of hip hop and fashion and politics for MTV as an intern. And then I got really into fashion. I was covering their crossroads, but suddenly I went down a different path. And what's really interesting about life, and perhaps distinctly in this age we're living in, is you can go A to Q to R and still end up at B. You don't have to go linear anymore. You don't have to go A to B to C. You can take a zigzaggy path and you can still find your way. And while I got really tantalized by fashion, I ultimately remembered that I really just wanted to fix things and went back to journalism in a way that I hope does that.
I love that. And I love what you're saying about the intersectionality as well of, for you specifically, you know, hip-hop and fashion in that moment with MTV, but then also your entire life. And I think what's really interesting about a lot of your writing is the stories that you cover are incredibly different and incredibly varied. But under it, it seems, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, that you are trying to right that wrong and to fix something that you see as an injustice.
Close, Blake. What important distinction that I have to make is that I'm not an advocate. I'm a journalist. And it's very, very important to make that distinction for yourself when you're pursuing this career, because otherwise, if I was an advocate, you couldn't trust what I was saying. If I had an agenda, if I had a goal, my goal really is to tell stories. I do want to tell stories about wrongs being done. There are things that are certainly identifiable wrongs that need to be righted. But I don't really go out there in searching for something to evangelize about or fight for. I go there and I identify a wrong and I say, here it is. With my nail salon story, what was fascinating is when we presented this wrong, immediately the government took action. But that wasn't why I wrote the story. I wrote the story for that idea that I began with, to help people see through other people's eyes and realize this wrong was happening.
So this passion that you have for telling stories and, like you said, helping people see through others' eyes, was there a defining moment or something that happened where you said, this is what I really want to do with my life, when you made that sort of decision? Do you have a story about that?
I think what I do with my life is so varied that I never decided this. The interesting thing about this job, which my mom says, you might not get paid much, but you get paid in fascination. So I don't think I ever decided I want to do this with my life, because my this is so dynamic. And I think that's a really important thing for people looking for things that will be careers, not just jobs, is to get paid in fascination. And more power to you if you get paid in cold hard cheddar too. But really, as long as you have fascination and can keep a roof over your head. But I never really had that moment, this is what I want to do. I've had really ratifying and affirming moments along the way. I'll tell a little quick story. Interestingly, I hired once, I had a back garden that was covered in brush in Harlem. And I hired a homeless guy to help me clear it. He was sort of this mayor of the block where I lived. He was always very, very helpful to people. And so I hired him to help me clear this brush. I couldn't do it on my own. And after it was done, we spent the afternoon raking and clearing. We sat together and had a beer. And he told me a story about how he used to be a nurse's aide and he had a beautiful house in Connecticut. And then he got addicted to crack and he destroyed everything and he lost his family. And then a couple minutes later he said, and you know, my birthday's coming up. It's the same day as Martin Luther King. And I'm really a lot like him. And I had this like record scratch moment, like, and I was like, wait, dude, you just told me you were addicted to crack. You betrayed your whole family for crack, and you just said that you're a lot like Martin Luther King. And he said, you know, I go and get people's mail when they can't get it, and I sweep their steps, and I pick up their laundry when they can't, and I ease people's lives. And Martin Luther King just wanted to ease people's lives. In that way, I'm a lot like him. And it just was this moment where I saw through another person's eyes in a way I never expected. I mean, how often you have a beer with a homeless guy and really stand in his shoes? And it was a powerful moment for me when I realized everybody has intrinsic worth and intrinsic narratives that they power themselves through their lives. And it was a really transformative moment where I realized everybody is important. And that's what I try to get across in my work.
That's really powerful.
Yeah, as I'm telling the story, I get goosebumps. It just moves me remembering that.
Yeah, I was literally going to say that. I was like, wow, that just gave me goosebumps listening to that story.
Yeah. I'm just going to say, people ask me, oh, is it interesting? I said, even boring people are interesting. You know, when I interview them, I want to know, why are you so boring? You know, there's just so much fascination in the world if you're just able to look or even just try to look.
Talk to us a little bit more about that sense of fascination, because do you find that you go looking for that kind of adventure outside of the journalism world too? Seeking fascination in the world?
They're one and the same. Whenever I go on any vacation or even a stroll on the street, I'm constantly in my mind churning over story ideas. Something I teach students is, when you look at the world, don't see phenomena in isolation, right? So don't see just like that tree with yellow flowers over there just happens to be planted by someone who likes yellow flowers. Look at it as just the tip of an iceberg. And it's really a mental exercise. So then you think, that tree with yellow flowers, maybe that's a new hybrid kind of tree that's coming to New York. I haven't noticed it before. Maybe there's a movement to plant trees with the yellow flowers. I pulled that example out of nowhere, but really tried to use this exercise of seeing the world as part of narratives and test it. You won't always be right, but that's how you find stories in the world, and also that's how you just keep stuff compelling.
I love that, because it reminds me of an exercise that I do sometimes that's reviewing the interconnectedness of everyone, because I think we can sometimes get into a pattern of just going about our days, and we're driving on the streets and we're going into a store and we're not really thinking about the people and their stories that led to this road even existing or this subway even existing. And to me, it reveals these levels of interconnectedness between us as humans that we don't normally think about.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating concept. And I often sometimes find myself just stuck still being like, who made cement? Not the guy who had invented it, but like, who's the person who, like, where did this paint color on the road come from? But It's very important to keep doing. A friend of mine, Ivy, stands in front of his window every morning, claps his hands together, spreads his arms wide, and goes, big. And it just prevents him from that kind of looking at your chest or the floor or your phone way of going through the world, and makes him look up. And he just goes, big. And I love it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh.
What a great reminder. So, in your journey so far, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've faced, and how have you overcome them?
I think the first challenge is self-doubt. That's the one that starts every journey and underpins many people's lives. So one of the most important people in my life is my father, who recently passed away, and he is a Holocaust survivor. And he masqueraded as a Catholic as a 9-year-old boy in Poland in order to escape being murdered by the Nazis. And his father was murdered and most of his family. But my father, this is probably the most powerful story I have, and it's a narrative I tell myself all the time. So my father emigrated to Israel after the war, and he only had a 5th grade education because he spent essentially all those years we're all doing arithmetic in hiding. And he got a GED, and he was coming back from trying to get a job at a coffee shop, but he had no business experience. You know, funny about that, like hiding in attics, you won't get any coffee pouring experience. So he didn't get the job at the coffee shop where he was training to be a barista. So he walks down the street in Israel, and he bumps into a girl he knows, and she says, where are you coming from? And he said, coming from getting rejected from yet another job. And he goes, where are you coming from? And she goes, I'm coming from the bank. The state of Israel was just formed. It's 1948. She goes, they're giving loans to go to medical school. And my dad goes, congratulations. And she goes, why are you congratulating me? And he said, well, because you applied for the loan. I mean, that's fabulous. She goes, I didn't apply for the loan. They would never give it to me. My dad looked at her and he said, let them say no first. And he walked straight to the bank and he applied for the loan with only a GED after having been rejected from this job at a coffee shop. He got the loan for medical school. He went to medical school in Vienna and ended up a very successful psychiatrist in Manhattan. And that motto, let them say no first, is my absolute guiding principle.
That's one of my favorite ones, too. Ivy was just laughing at me. She knows I always say that, let them tell you no.
Wow, I didn't know that.
That's so good.
Is name Yehuda by any chance?
Maybe an alter ego. So, in thinking just of other challenges, when your story Unvarnished came out, there was a significant backlash. People were protesting outside the office with your face marked out. Like, how do you process that kind of animosity?
Well, very interestingly, after Unvarnished came out, there was no pushback at all for 6 months. And then at the 6-month mark, exactly, the laws that the governor put into effect to prevent this wholesale theft of wages from these women came into play. And so these salons that had previously done business a very lucrative and very illegal way were suddenly forced into compliance. And so it's very important to understand the timing of that pushback. They suddenly had to get regulated, and it would cost them. So they were furious. And what's really important to handle negativity of any sort is to have done your homework and to really be unimpeachable with how thorough you are. And my story was researched over 13 months. It had the voices of over 125 manicurists and several hundred other people in it. And it wasn't wrong. And so that really steeled me for the pushback. It was painful, yes, but my story doesn't have a single correction on it. And actually, just a couple days ago, the governor announced he ordered owners to pay $2 million in stolen wages to 650 manicurists. And it's just, they tried to trounce it because when people are losing a lot of money, it's understandable that they want to do business the lucrative and unfortunately illegal way. But they didn't want to change, and they had to. But the really important part is to steel yourself by going beyond your own expectations and making sure your T's are triple crossed and your I's are quintuple dotted.
I love that. I'm extrapolating the great lesson from that for people even who are not journalists. I'm going to just bounce this off you and let me know how you feel about it, but I'm hearing this sense of clarity and certainty in moving forward. And so when I think of steeling myself against things that challenges or things that might come up or people who might be saying no, it's like when I feel really certain in myself or my path and whatever that looks like, that can help me be prepared for obstacles or things that might come in my way.
Yeah, and that can sound like an impossible goal, because if you're not really certain, how can I go forward? How can I try? But certain is a state of mind. Something I tell people when they're entering the job marketplace or when they're going to be an intern, they say, what should I do? And I say, be the best. Everybody knows what the best looks like, right? If you're thinking about a babysitter, the best babysitter is the one who gets the kids to eat breakfast, who reads them a story, who's engaged, who puts them to bed with a nice song, and then who promptly shows up. Everybody knows with a job what the best is. And so when people enter internships in particular, I say, just be the best. Be better than everyone else, because that is identifiable and it is doable, but it takes will. And that's really the only thing standing in between you and professional success. I really do believe that.
I like that a lot, because I think when we talk with millennials, one sense of frustration that we get sometimes is not necessarily knowing what that standard is or looks like. And one of the things I really like about what you just said about being the best is if you don't know what that best looks like, you can ask. So you can ask, someone who would be hiring for the position you want or in the career or field that you're interested in, what is the best person you've ever seen in this field? What did they do? What made them the best?
And Blake, I'll take it a step further. Asking is part of being the best.
Mm-hmm.
That is what it looks like. Can I help you? How can I be better at this? Those are all part of being the best.
That is wonderful. So what other advice would you give to millennials who are still on this path toward finding fulfillment and success in their own lives?
Oh, gosh. I think I'm all tapped out for advice. I sound like a grandma. I'm still figuring it out. I'm with you.
Yeah.
I'm still ever climbing or ever sinking. It's just a march. One thing someone told me that was really, really interesting, I have a group for young women called the Old Girls Club at the New York Times, which is a play on the old boys club, quote unquote, that journalism and many industries used to be. And we get together and talk about issues that face women and young women in particular. And one woman came and spoke to us, an editor at the Times, and she said, nobody ever tells you that your career is not going to be a graph shooting endlessly upward, sort of a picture a graph. She said, your career is going to be a sine wave. It's going to be up, it's going to be down, but it's going to keep going. And be aware of that and be prepared for that, because everybody tells you it's either up or bust. And she's like, no, it's a wave. And the other thing that the feminist activist Gloria Steinem told me in this group, she came and spoke to us, she said, it's very, very important to have groups of your peers, to spend time with them and to engage with them and to ask each other questions and bounce each other questions off each other. She said it in specific with women, but it can be applied to anyone, if only for the reason that you hear someone say something and you go, wait, you too? I'm not crazy? And that's very, very valuable.
That sense of community is incredibly powerful, and I love the Old Girls Club. It's a great concept. So as we're starting to wrap up here, we'd love to explore a little bit more about what gets you motivated. And starting off, what do you do after you wake up in the morning on an ideal day to ensure that you're going to have a great day?
A work day or a Sarah day?
You can give us either one, or both.
Both.
Yeah.
Gosh. Well, the first thing I do is check in with myself and make it okay if I don't have a great day. We're always aspiring to constant happiness and constant perfection. And then when you don't have that, you think, oh God, I'm so upset that I don't have it. It's like it's perpetuating negativity, especially the Instagramification of everyone else's lives. They look like they're having such an awesome time, and they must clearly be having a better time than you. And you can be very down on yourself when you're not having a great day. So I think you have to be aware that days are days and let the bad ones go. Personally, I love animals. So I try to make sure animals are a really big part of my life. I love horses. I love cats and dogs. I even love insects. I am indiscriminate lover of all animals. So if animals are a part of my day, I have a great day. And then professionally, it's finding out new things. The other day, I went to the edge of a shore in Brooklyn to look at whether a public dock that had been built as storm resilient, was this $1.1 million project, had broken. And I wanted to look if it was still broken. And that's a pretty dry story, right? Like, what kind of day Sarah goes to Brooklyn by herself and looks at a dock? And I get to the edge of the water and no dock. And I just said, sorry, what? A $1.1 million thing gone missing? Turns out the storm resilient thing that broke while they're waiting to repair it broke again. And it became this fascinating story about good intentions gone wrong, and find the money and find the dock, which I did many miles away, hidden under at least 11 pounds of swan feces. And it's about being open to the world's sort of whimsicality and interestingness. You can go into something that's very dry, and if you pull at the threads, I think this applies to everything. Maybe I'm speaking a little abstractly, but you can find a twinkle in any situation.
I love looking for something that can seem ordinary and letting that take you on a journey. And even in your day, like you're saying too, it's not necessarily that the day has to be great, or if it's not great that somehow we failed at life. But sometimes it is those days when things don't go according to plan, or when nothing that extraordinary happens. Sometimes those are setting us up or in the middle of some amazing transformation. And I think that's part of the whole trusting the process idea, is that, like you said, with the sine curve for your career.
Well, even for your day, right?
That's exactly right.
It's a stupid example. I have some passionfruit soda in my hand right now. I really love passionfruit soda, and I love it so much that I bought a box and put it in my fridge so I don't have to go to the store and get it, and so that I can have it as part of my life. And when I went and got this passionfruit soda from my fridge, I thought, you've arrived, Sarah. You figured this one out. And it's so small, but it was such a little moment in my day. It sounds so mundane when you're talking about the other stuff that people do in their lives, and even I do in my life. Not everything has to be blinding glory. You can find pleasure and worth in lots of things, and I think it's an exercise to make sure you do that. You have to build that muscle. But man, is this passionfruit soda good.
Yeah, I feel that way about coffee in the morning. And I really love having a different fun mug is greeting me. It feels like joy, and I'm cracking up because you're like, you have arrived. And that's how I feel in the morning with my coffee, actually.
Well, look, being a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize a couple weeks ago was one of the most extraordinary moments of my life, and it felt like every single thing paid off ever. And that you can recognize those moments, but it doesn't make the other moments of small achievement and just small joys any less. And I think it's super important not to just stack the deck so high that you can't ever reach it. You have to take pleasure and delight in all the things. And Blake, you said before, finding these little joys in life and letting them take you on a journey. And I thought to myself, that could be my life motto. That's my profession, and that's my outlook.
That's great. So, Sarah, do you have a motivational quote or a book or something you'd like to share that's changed your life?
Sure. My father's quote, "Let them say no first," is my go-to motivational quote. And actually, it's many of my friends' motivational quotes now, which is very gratifying. And the other one is from my other hero, Martin Luther King Jr., which is, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." And I think that can be taken in macro or micro ways. And I think it's powerful and uplifting and just the most hopeful quote I have. And the other person who inspires me, who is soon going to grace our currency, is Sojourner Truth, abolitionist slave herself. And it really speaks to my involvement with women's issues and fighting for the disenfranchised, which is, if the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, then these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And the second part of that, and now's they's asking to do it, and the men better let them.
And that's the real part.
Yeah. That's when Sojourner gets real.
Yes.
Amazing.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us today, Sarah. I'd love for you to share with the audience how they can find out more about you and your work.
Oh, well, there's this thing called the newspaper, and it is the New York Times, and it is no longer in your mailbox or on your lawn in a paper form exclusively. It is also on your phone, and there's an app, and it's all over Twitter, and we have a Snapchat and an Instagram, and the New York Times is really, really cool, believe it or not, and really informative. I highly recommend that you search that thing, not just for me, but for things that bend the arc of the universe towards justice, as to borrow a phrase from Dr. King.
Amazing. Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you. I'm honored.
The Motivational Millennial podcast is supported by Motivational Millennial Consulting Services. We work with organizations and teams to develop millennial leaders by understanding and tapping into millennial skills and values. In short, we strive to enrich organizations one millennial at a time. To learn more about our customized offerings, visit motivationalmillennial.com/consulting. Welcome to the after show of our conversation with Sarah Maslin Nir. One thing that Sarah said during the interview that I really appreciated early on, she said, get paid in fascination and keep a roof over your head, which I feel really could be a motto for millennials. You know, many millennials, I think, who are striving to do something meaningful professionally, you know, get paid in fascination, but still make enough money to actually pay rent. And it's a challenge often, I think, because early on especially, it's hard to find careers that pay substantially where you're able to do work maybe that's directly in the field you're looking to do. There are obviously some exceptions to that, but I think at the same time that's one of the defining characteristics of our generation, is that the corporate path as it was sold to maybe our parents or our parents' parents exists in very select pockets of the economy these days. And so when we look at where are the opportunities to do meaningful work, they are often in small businesses or nonprofits or entrepreneurial startups that people do, or just freelancing. And I think that generational shift has really changed what millennials expect in the workforce, but also what motivates people. And I know certainly in some of Ivy's and my endeavors, a lot of what we've done has really been driven by how can we serve people, how can we follow our passions and support other people through various skills or knowledge that we might have. And the money is important to keep, you know.
Yeah, I was going to say.
To keep everything else going. And it can be really stressful when there's not enough of it. But I think meaning making is really important these days.
Yeah, and I think it's really cool, too, because however we can find a way to bring that fascination into our lives, and it may not be... Let me start over. However we can find a way to bring that fascination into our lives is great, because it may not be that we make it our vocation. Mm-hmm. It might be that we have a job at a corporate place and we love that job, or we enjoy it and we get satisfaction and meaning from it, but there's also another part of us that's has a creative hobby or passion or fascination, and so we start a club, or there are ways to include fascination in our lives while also feeling secure so that we can have both of those things. And I think that however feels the best for us to bring that into our lives is... I just feel like it varies depending on the person, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's really cool. I think that's a great thing. I think I totally would agree with you in that that's a characteristic of millennials, to really value their work and want their days to be filled with purpose. And a lot of us are willing to just have whatever day job so that we can continue to do that. And I think that's really beautiful too. But I also think there's other ways to marry it. And so I think whatever path to include that fascination in your life is really cool too.
Yeah, I think for me, that was a choice that I made with music. Early on, I did music professionally in Europe, and that was a very pop style, which was great fun. But at the same time, I always had my socially conscious hip-hop music that I knew would not necessarily be a commercial success unless I made certain compromises or changes. And I just thought to myself, that's okay. I don't need my hip-hop work to be a part of my career in terms of making music, which ironically enough, it did end up becoming part of my career when I did hip-hop motivational speaking. But at the time, I just thought, I just love making this music that is positive and inspirational and involves a lot of wordplay, and that might not be as commercial as most of the other music out there, but that was okay. It was fascinating, fun, and it made a difference in people's lives. So what takeaway would you say you had from our talk with Sarah?
So for me, I really liked the place where she was talking about, and the quote that stands out to me is, "Who made cement?" Because she was talking about the stories that are behind everything around us, behind the world, that make up the world, she said. I mentioned it in the interview, but it reminded me of the interconnectedness of people, and particularly this instance recently. I've gotten to a place in my life where when I'm driving in traffic, I don't just see cars with, I don't know, when you totally depersonalize the traffic experience and you're not thinking about how there are human beings in each vehicle, maybe multiple human beings with their whole range of emotions and experiences and fears and joys, and there's a whole beautiful person inside each vehicle, but we get caught up in this whole river of, in some cases in the Bay Area for sure, a river of other vehicles, and we depersonalize it a lot. So I've started a practice of trying to be aware that there are people in these cars. So if someone cuts me off, or if I accidentally cut someone off, I always make sure to wave or say I'm sorry or say thank you as much as you can while you're driving. And it reminds me of this moment when, I actually think you might have been in the car, I can't recall, but we were driving to some destination and there was a fellow behind me who was really riding my tail. He wanted me to go way above the speed limit. And in the past, I think I would have felt very defensive and hurt by this, and in that moment, I literally, the first thing that came to my mind was, bless his heart, because I just knew that I wasn't gonna speed, and I was gonna follow the rules, and I was gonna keep going the pace I was, and I just really felt for him, because he was obviously very frustrated by that situation, and I was just thinking, I really hope that whatever is causing that for him is going to dissipate later, and that he doesn't go throughout his whole day feeling that way. And no, there's something about really remembering that there are stories behind everything and that we're all part of it, brings in a lot of compassion and openness and care that actually, for me, makes living a lot more beautiful.
Yeah, I think the humanization is really important, because it can be so...
Summing it up. Humanization is true, yeah.
Because it can be so easy to look at people as this person's an impediment or a stepping stone. It can be really easy, and especially I think when you're traveling, especially, in airports, like, this person's blocking my way, or this person's slowing me down, or this person, this gate agent won't, let me do what I want to do, or put my bag there. And I think it's the same thing in a car, same thing even walking down the sidewalk. Anytime, if you've been walking in a major metropolitan area where there are lots of tourists, especially, you think, why are all these people in my way? Why don't they move faster?
Why are they taking pictures of everything?
That's right. That pigeon's not interesting. But to your point, everything is interconnected, and I think David Foster Wallace has a great commencement address called "This Is Water," when he talks about imagining what's going on inside other people's heads, and it's the experience of empathy. But it's so true, and I think what a beautiful way to transmute the inherent frustration of daily life is to look at it for opportunities of gratitude and interconnectedness. That's really nice.
Thank you. And thank you all for listening to today's episode of the Motivational Millennial Podcast and for hanging out with us during the after show. We hope that you will come back next week.
Take care. For show notes and upcoming guests, or to learn more about Coactive Coaching, the blog, and our other awesome offerings, visit motivationalmillennial.com. Keep in touch with us at facebook.com/motivationalmillennial.
We'd love to hear from you. Shoot us an email with your thoughts, comments, and suggestions at podcast@motivationalmillennial.com. And tell us who you might like to hear from, or if you think you or anyone you know would be good for the show.
The Motivational Millennial Podcast is edited by Christy Hostler and Team Podcast.
Our theme music was composed